Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones who deliver the cruelest blows. I learned this lesson at 23, standing in a restaurant kitchen with grease-stained hands and tears I refused to let fall, while my own family sat in the dining room laughing at my expense. But what they didn't know that night was that their mockery would become the fuel for the biggest transformation of my life. What they couldn't have imagined was that 5 years later, I'd be the one holding the keys to that very restaurant, with the power to decide whether they'd ever set foot inside again. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The old Victorian house on Maple Street in Burlington, Vermont, had been our family's anchor for 3 generations. With its wraparound porch, creaking wooden floors, and the massive oak tree that shaded the front yard, it felt like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. My grandmother, Patricia Brennan, had raised 4 children in that house, including my father, Michael. The kitchen always smelled like cinnamon rolls and coffee, and every Sunday, the dining room table groaned under the weight of home-cooked meals that brought together aunts, uncles, and cousins from all over town. I was Madison Brennan, the youngest of 3 children, and for the first 22 years of my life, I believed that house would always be our safe harbor. My older brother Nathan worked at the local bank, already climbing the corporate ladder with the confidence that came from being the golden child. My sister Jessica had married young and moved to the suburbs with her accountant husband, but she still showed up every Sunday with her 2 perfect children, ready to bask in the family's approval. Then there was me. I'd graduated from the University of Vermont with a degree in hospitality management, full of dreams about opening my own restaurant someday. But dreams don't pay student loans, and the hospitality industry in a small Vermont town wasn't exactly booming with opportunities for recent graduates. So I'd been working as an assistant manager at a small hotel downtown, saving every penny I could while living in Grandma's house, helping her with groceries and maintenance in exchange for practically free rent. Grandma Patricia was 84, but she had the energy of someone half her age. She'd wake up every morning at 6, make a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and spend her days tending to her vegetable garden or reading mystery novels on the front porch. She'd never married again after Grandpa died 15 years earlier, claiming she was too set in her ways to deal with another man's habits. But I knew the real reason was that she'd found her independence and wasn't about to give it up for anyone. The crack in our foundation started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when Grandma's hand trembled as she hung up the receiver. She turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That was Dr. Henderson," she said, her voice steady despite the news I could see weighing on her shoulders. The tests came back. The words pancreatic cancer hit the kitchen like a cold wind. Stage 3. Maybe 6 months, the doctor had said, possibly a year with aggressive treatment. But Grandma Patricia, being exactly who she'd always been, had already made her decision. "I'm not spending my last months in some sterile hospital room, pumped full of chemicals that might buy me a few extra weeks," she said, settling into her favorite chair at the kitchen table. "I want to be here, in my garden, in my own bed, with my family around me." I dropped into the chair across from her, my mind reeling. "Grandma, there have to be other options. We could get a second opinion, look into clinical trials." She reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers still strong despite their age. "Madison, honey, I've lived a good life. I raised my children, I loved your grandfather for 37 years, and I've watched you kids grow up into people I'm proud of. I'm not afraid of what's coming. But I need to know that you'll all be okay when I'm gone." The next few weeks passed in a blur of family meetings, medical appointments, and uncomfortable conversations about wills and funeral arrangements. Nathan immediately took charge, as he always did, organizing schedules for Grandma's care and handling the legal paperwork with the efficiency of someone who dealt with these matters professionally. Jessica threw herself into research, printing out stacks of articles about alternative treatments and support groups, convinced that if she just found the right information, she could fix everything. And me? I became Grandma's shadow. I took leave from my job at the hotel to stay with her full-time, learning how to manage her medications, driving her to doctor's appointments, and spending long afternoons listening to stories about her childhood that I'd never heard before. She talked about growing up during the Depression, about meeting Grandpa at a church dance, about the fears and hopes she'd carried while raising 4 children on a factory worker's salary. "This house has seen so much life," she said one evening as we sat on the front porch watching the sunset. "Your father took his first steps right there by that apple tree. Your Aunt Sarah carved her initials in the porch railing when she was 12, thought I didn't notice. And you used to climb that oak tree every summer, scared the life out of me." I leaned back in the old rocking chair, trying to memorize the moment. "It's going to be strange, this place without you in it." Grandma's eyes sparkled with something. That might have been mischief. Who says I won't be in it? This house and I have an understanding. I'm not planning to go far. As autumn turned to winter, Grandma's condition started to decline more rapidly than the doctors had predicted. She began needing help with basic tasks, and the family care schedule became more intensive. That's when the first hints of what was coming began to surface. It started with small comments from Nathan about the financial burden of Grandma's care. The medications alone are costing a fortune, he'd say during our weekly family meetings. And if she needs round-the-clock nursing eventually, we're looking at thousands of dollars a month. Jessica would nod in agreement, adding her own concerns. David and I are trying to save for the kids' college funds. We can't afford to drain our savings indefinitely. But it was the conversation I overheard between Nathan and his wife, Sharon, that really opened my eyes to what was happening. I'd come downstairs late one night to get Grandma a glass of water when I heard their voices in the living room. I don't understand why Madison gets to live here rent-free while the rest of us are struggling to make ends meet, Sharon was saying. It's not fair that she gets all the benefits of being the caregiver while we're the ones footing the bills. Nathan's response chilled me to the bone. Don't worry about it. Mom's already talked to the lawyer about the will. The house is going to be sold after she passes, and the money will be split 4 ways between the kids. Madison can find her own place like the rest of us did. I stood frozen in the hallway, Grandma's water glass trembling in my hand. They were already planning for her death, already dividing up her possessions like she was gone. And nowhere in their calculations was there any consideration for the fact that I'd given up my job, my independence, and my own plans to take care of the woman who'd raised us all. The next morning, I sat with Grandma in her bedroom as she sorted through old photo albums. Her hands moved slowly now, each gesture deliberate and careful. Madison, she said without looking up from a picture of my grandfather in his army uniform, I need to tell you something about the will. My stomach dropped. Grandma, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She closed the album and turned to face me. Your father and his siblings think they know what's best. They think this house is just an asset to be liquidated, turned into college funds and retirement accounts. But this house isn't just money, Madison. It's history. It's continuity. It's the place where our family story began. She reached into her nightstand drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. I've been thinking about this for months, even before the diagnosis. You're the only one who understands what this place really means. You're the only one who sees it as a home instead of just a real estate investment. I took the envelope with shaking hands, knowing that whatever was inside was about to change everything. What is this? It's the deed to the house, she said simply. I'm transferring ownership to you, effective immediately. The house is yours, Madison. It always should have been. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Grandma, I can't accept this. Nathan and Jessica and Aunt Sarah, they'll never forgive me. They'll think I manipulated you. Her eyes, still sharp despite her illness, fixed on mine with an intensity that reminded me why she'd been the undisputed matriarch of our family for so many years. Let them think about what they want. I've lived long enough to know the difference between someone who loves you for who you are and someone who loves you for what you can give them. You've proven which kind of person you are, Madison. Now I'm proving which kind of person I am. That evening, when Nathan and Jessica arrived for their scheduled visit, Grandma called a family meeting in the living room. The 4 of us sat in the chairs that had hosted thousands of family discussions over the years, but this one felt different. There was a weight in the air, a sense that we were standing at the edge of something that couldn't be undone. I've made some changes to my will, Grandma announced without preamble. The house is no longer part of the estate. I've transferred ownership to Madison. The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan's face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that reminded me of raw anger. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Mom, you can't be serious, Nathan finally managed. This house is worth over $300,000. You can't just give it away to one person. I didn't give it away, Grandma replied calmly. I gave it to the person who earned it. Madison has been taking care of me for months, sacrificing her own career and future to make sure I'm comfortable. What have the rest of you sacrificed? Jessica found her voice, and it came out high and strained. We have families to think about, Grandma. Children who need college funds. We can't all just drop everything and play nursemaid. The word nursemaid hung in the air like a slap. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation and anger, but Grandma's expression never changed. No, she said quietly, you can't. But Madison could. And she did. That tells me everything I need to know about her character, and everything I need to know about yours. Nathan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This isn't over, Mom. You're sick, you're not thinking clearly. We can contest this. We can prove you weren't competent to make this decision. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. For the first time in the conversation, Grandma's composure cracked slightly. But instead of hurt, what showed through was steel. I've been competent enough to manage my own affairs for 84 years, Nathan Michael Brennan. I was competent enough to raise you and put you through college and bail you out when you made that disastrous real estate investment 5 years ago. Don't you dare question my competence now just because you don't like my decision. That was the moment I realized that the family I'd grown up believing in, the Sunday dinners, the shared holidays, the sense of unconditional love and support, had been built on a foundation that was already cracking. The house on Maple Street would still be my home, but it would never again be the safe harbor I'd always believed it to be. The people I'd loved most in the world had just shown me exactly how much that love was worth. And as I watched Nathan storm out and Jessica follow him with tears in her eyes, I understood that I was truly alone for the first time in my life, but I also understood something else. Grandma Patricia had given me more than just a house. She'd given me a choice about what kind of person I wanted to be when everything fell apart. And I was determined not to let her down. Grandma Patricia passed away on a snowy February morning, just as the sun was breaking through the clouds over Lake Champlain. She died peacefully in her sleep, her hand still warm when I found her at 6:30, the same time she'd been waking up for the past 60 years. I sat with her for an hour before calling anyone, watching the morning light filter through the lace curtains she'd hung in that bedroom 30 years ago, trying to memorize the peace on her face. The funeral was everything she would have hated, formal, stuffy, and full of relatives who hadn't spoken to her in years suddenly appearing with tears and regrets. Nathan had taken charge of the arrangements, booking the biggest funeral home in town and ordering flowers that cost more than most people's rent. He stood at the podium delivering a eulogy about what a devoted mother and grandmother she'd been, while I sat in the front row knowing that he'd spoken to her exactly 3 times in the 2 months before she died. Jessica sobbed dramatically in the second row, clutching her husband David's arm and dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Every few minutes, she'd glance around to make sure people were noticing her grief. It was a performance worthy of a daytime soap opera, complete with strategic pauses and perfectly timed gasps, but it was the conversation I overheard during the reception that showed me just how quickly the vultures had been circling. "I still can't believe Mom did this to us," Jessica was saying to our Aunt Sarah in the church basement, her voice carrying over the clatter of coffee cups and paper plates. "Giving the entire house to Madison just because she played the martyr for a few months." Aunt Sarah, who'd flown in from Phoenix and hadn't seen Grandma in 3 years, nodded sympathetically. "It's not right, Jess. That house has been in the family for generations. It should be divided equally among all the grandchildren." "Exactly," Nathan chimed in, appearing beside them with a cup of coffee and a grim expression. "Madison manipulated a sick old woman. She isolated Mom from the rest of us and convinced her that we didn't care. It's textbook elder abuse." I stood frozen behind the food table, a plate of cookies trembling in my hands. Elder abuse? That's what they were calling the 8 months. I'd spent helping Grandma shower, driving her to chemotherapy appointments, and holding her hand through panic attacks at 3 in the morning. "We need to contest the will," Jessica continued, her voice taking on the sharp edge it always had when she wanted something. "David looked into it, and apparently there's a clause about undue influence. If we can prove Madison coerced Mom into changing the will, we can get it overturned." "The problem is proving it," Nathan replied, his banker's mind already working through the logistics. "We need evidence that Madison deliberately isolated Mom or convinced her to cut us out. But Mom was pretty sharp right up until the end." Aunt Sarah leaned in conspiratorially. "What about the fact that Madison quit her job to take care of her? That could be seen as calculating, positioning herself to inherit by making herself indispensable." The plate slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor and sending cookies scattering across the linoleum. The entire room went quiet, and when I looked up, I found 3 pairs of eyes staring at me with expressions that ranged from guilt to outright hostility. "Madison," Nathan said, his voice carefully neutral, "we were just talking about Mom's arrangements." "I heard what you were talking about," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "And if you want to contest the will, go ahead. But you should know that Grandma recorded a video message explaining her decision. She was very clear about her mental state and her reasons." It was a lie. There was no video. But the momentary flash of uncertainty in Nathan's eyes told me the bluff had worked, at least temporarily. The weeks following the funeral were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Nathan, who'd always been the family's golden boy, suddenly transformed into a concerned sibling worried about my mental health and financial stability. He'd show up at the house unannounced, always with some excuse about checking on me or helping with paperwork, but really conducting reconnaissance missions to find ammunition for his legal challenge. "You know, Maddie," he said one afternoon, settling into Grandma's favorite chair without invitation, "this house is a huge responsibility. The property taxes alone are over $8,000 a year, not to mention maintenance and utilities. Are you sure you can handle all that on an assistant manager's salary?" I looked up from the stack of sympathy cards I was sorting through, noting how he'd positioned himself in Grandma's chair like he already owned it. "I'll manage." "But that's just it, you don't have to manage on your own. If we sell the house and split the proceeds, you'd have enough for a down payment on your own place, something more reasonable for a single person. You could even go back to school, get your master's degree, really build a career for yourself." His tone was so reasonable, so caring, that someone who didn't know him might actually believe he had my best interests at heart. But I'd grown up watching Nathan manipulate situations to his advantage. I knew that when he offered to help, it was because he wanted something in return. "The house isn't for sale, Nathan. I'm just saying you should keep your options open. This place is going to eat up every penny you make, and for what? So you can live alone in a house that's way too big for one person?" Before I could answer, Jessica arrived with her usual dramatic flourish, bursting through the front door with her arms full of casserole dishes and her children trailing behind her. "Madison," she called out, her voice echoing through the hallway. "I brought dinner. I figured you probably haven't been eating properly since the funeral." She swept into the kitchen like she owned the place, directing her kids to the living room and beginning to unpack containers of food I hadn't asked for. "I made your favorite, that chicken and rice casserole Mom used to make for Sunday dinners. And I brought some of those dinner rolls from the bakery downtown." The casual way she called Grandma Mom grated against my nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. Jessica had spent the last 10 years correcting her children when they called Grandma anything other than Great-Grandma Patricia, insisting it was important to maintain proper family hierarchy. Now, suddenly, she was claiming a maternal relationship that had never existed. "You don't have to cook for me, Jess. I'm perfectly capable of feeding myself." She turned from the refrigerator with a hurt expression that would have won her an Oscar. "I'm just trying to help. We're family, Madison. We need to stick together during difficult times." Nathan nodded from his position in Grandma's chair. "That's exactly what I was telling her. We're all worried about Madison trying to handle everything alone." The way they tag-teamed me felt rehearsed, like they'd planned this intervention beforehand. Jessica moved around the kitchen with the familiarity of someone who belonged there, opening cabinets and rearranging items while talking about family obligations and shared responsibilities. Nathan watched from the living room, occasionally chiming in with supportive comments about how much they both cared about my well-being. "You know," Jessica said, pulling plates from the cabinet, "David and I have been thinking. If you ever decide this house is too much to handle, we'd be willing to buy it from you. We could give you a fair price, and then the kids could grow up here like we did. It would keep the house in the family." "A fair price according to whom?" I asked. "Well, obviously we'd need to have it appraised," Nathan interjected. "But given the current market conditions and the amount of work this place needs, I'd estimate it's worth maybe $250, $270 at most." I almost laughed. The house had been appraised at $320 just 6 months earlier for insurance purposes, a fact that Nathan knew perfectly well since he'd handled Grandma's financial paperwork. But they were counting on my grief and inexperience to make me doubt the house's true value. "The thing is," Jessica continued, setting the table for 3 even though I hadn't agreed to eat with them, "this house has so many memories tied up in it. It might be healthier for you to start fresh somewhere else, make new memories instead of being surrounded by reminders of loss." The irony was breathtaking. For months, they'd accused me of manipulating Grandma, but here they were, using every trick in the psychological manipulation playbook to convince me to give up my inheritance. They were packaging their greed as concern for my emotional well-being, their legal challenge as family intervention. Over the following weeks, the campaign intensified. Nathan would stop by with newspaper clippings about the housing market, pointing out articles about young people who'd gotten in over their heads with property ownership. Jessica brought her children around more frequently, letting them run through the house and play in Grandma's garden while talking loudly about how wonderful it would be if they could live there someday. "Emma and Jake just love this place so much," she'd say, watching her 8-year-old daughter climb the same apple tree I'd climbed 20 years earlier. "It would be such a shame if they never got to experience growing up here like we did." The guilt trips were relentless and expertly crafted. They painted me as selfish for keeping a family home to myself, irresponsible for taking on financial obligations I supposedly couldn't handle, and cruel for denying their children the same childhood experiences we'd had. Every conversation became a carefully orchestrated effort to wear down my resolve and make me doubt Grandma's decision, but the moment I realized just how far they were willing to go came on a rainy Thursday evening in March. I'd been at the grocery store when I came home to find Nathan's car in the driveway and lights on in rooms I'd left dark. I walked into the house to find him in Grandma's bedroom with a real estate agent, discussing square footage and potential renovations. Madison. Nathan looked genuinely surprised to see me, which told me he'd been tracking my schedule. This is Carol Henderson from Burlington Realty. I was just getting a professional opinion on the house's condition. Carol, a woman in her 50s, with perfectly styled hair and a nervous smile, extended her hand apologetically. I'm so sorry for your loss, dear. Your brother was just showing me around so I could give him an estimate of potential market value. Nathan doesn't own this house, I said quietly, setting my grocery bags on the dresser where Grandma's jewelry box used to sit. He has no authority to invite real estate agents here. Nathan's face flushed red. I was just gathering information. Madison. If you're serious about keeping the house, you need to understand what you're dealing with financially. What I'm dealing with is family members who are treating my home like it's already for sale. Carol Henderson cleared her throat uncomfortably. Perhaps I should leave you two to discuss this privately. Yes, I said, not taking my eyes off Nathan. Perhaps you should. After the real estate agent left, Nathan and I stood in Grandma's bedroom facing each other like opponents in a boxing ring. The pretense of brotherly concern had finally been stripped away, leaving only naked ambition and barely controlled anger. You can't keep this up forever, Madison, he said, his voice low and threatening. This house is going to bankrupt you. And when it does, don't expect us to bail you out. I've never expected anything from you, Nathan. That's the difference between us. The difference between us is that I live in the real world, he snapped. I understand financial responsibility and long-term planning. You're living in a fantasy where you can afford to maintain a property like this on what you make at that hotel. Actually, I said, opening the bedroom door in a clear invitation for him to leave, I quit my job at the hotel 3 weeks ago. Nathan's eyes widened with what looked like triumph. See? You're already making poor decisions. How are you going to pay your bills without an income? I got a new job, I continued, enjoying the way his confident expression began to falter. I'm waiting tables at the greenhouse downtown. It's honest work that pays better than you might think. The change in Nathan's demeanor was instantaneous and brutal. The mask of concerned brother slipped completely, revealing something ugly underneath. You're waiting tables? Jesus, Madison, what would Mom and Dad think? They didn't raise us to be service workers. The contempt in his voice was so thick I could practically taste it. This was what Nathan really thought of people who worked in restaurants, who served food and cleaned tables and smiled at customers for tips. This was his true opinion of anyone whose work involved physical labor instead of shuffling papers in an office. Grandma would be proud of me for working hard and supporting myself, I replied. She waitressed at Miller's Diner for 15 years to help put Dad through college. But I guess you forgot that part of our family history. Nathan's face went white, then red again. He'd walked into a trap of his own making, revealing his true attitudes about working-class jobs while inadvertently insulting the grandmother whose will he was trying to contest. That was different, he muttered, but the fight had gone out of his voice. No, Nathan. It wasn't different at all. The only difference is that Grandma was proud of her work, and you're ashamed of mine. As I watched my brother leave that night, his shoulders stiff with wounded pride and frustrated greed, I realized that the family I'd grown up believing in had been an illusion. These people who shared my DNA, who'd sat around the same dinner table for countless Sunday meals, who'd pretended to care about my well-being, they'd never really seen me as anything more than an obstacle to their inheritance, but they'd made one crucial mistake in their campaign to break me down. They'd shown me exactly what they thought of honest work, of people who served others for a living. And in doing so, they'd revealed something about themselves that I'd never forget, because when the time came, and I was already beginning to suspect it would come sooner than they imagined, I'd remember every sneer, every condescending comment. Every moment they'd made me feel small for choosing dignity over self-pity. They wanted me to fail. They were counting on it, but failure, I was beginning to understand, was just another word for motivation. The greenhouse sat on Church Street in downtown Burlington, squeezed between a vintage bookstore and a yoga studio. It was the kind of farm-to-table restaurant that attracted college students, young professionals, and tourists who wanted to experience authentic Vermont cuisine. The exposed brick walls were lined with mason jar lights, and every table featured fresh herbs growing in small terracotta pots. It was trendy, busy, and exactly the kind of place where tips could actually pay the bills if you were willing to work hard. My manager, Tom Rodriguez, was a 40-something former chef from Boston who'd moved to Vermont to escape the restaurant industry's notorious burnout culture. He ran the greenhouse with the efficiency of someone who'd worked every position in a kitchen and understood that good servers were worth their weight in gold. When I'd applied for the job, he'd been more interested in my willingness to work nights and weekends than my hospitality degree. Restaurant work isn't glamorous, he'd told me during my interview, his dark eyes studying my face for signs of entitlement or unrealistic expectations. You'll be on your feet for 8 hours straight, dealing with customers who think you're their personal servant, cleaning up messes that would make you sick to your stomach. You sure you can handle that? I'd thought about Grandma scrubbing floors at the diner, about the pride in her voice when she talked about putting Dad through college with her tip money. I'm sure. That had been 6 weeks ago, and I was already one of Tom's most reliable servers. I'd mastered the art of balancing 4 plates up my arm, learned to read customers' moods before they even sat down, and developed the kind of stamina that came from necessity rather than choice. The work was physically demanding and sometimes demoralizing, but it was honest, and more importantly, it was mine. What I hadn't expected was how quickly word would spread through Burlington's surprisingly small social circles about Madison Brennan. Slinging plates at the greenhouse.it started with whispered conversations at the grocery store. Former classmates from high school would see me in my black server's uniform after a shift and do double takes, their expressions cycling through surprise, confusion, and barely concealed superiority. Madison Brennan? Didn't she go to UVM? What's she doing waiting tables? The questions always reached me secondhand, filtered through mutual acquaintances who delivered them with the kind of false sympathy that made my skin crawl. People are just worried about you, my old college roommate Sarah Chen had said when she called after running into Nathan at the bank. They're wondering if everything's okay, financially speaking. But it was Jessica who turned my career choice into a weapon of public humiliation. She started showing up at the greenhouse for lunch, always with a different group of her suburban mom friends, always requesting to sit in my section. The first time it happened, I'd been genuinely glad to see her, thinking maybe she was finally ready to bridge the gap that had opened between us since Grandma's death. Madison, she'd called out, waving from a foretop near the window. Could we get some menus over here? I'd approached their table with genuine warmth, ready to play the role of gracious server for my sister and her friends. Hey, Jess. Good to see you. How are Emma and Jake? But instead of the family catch-up I'd expected, Jessica had launched into a performance that left me reeling. Oh, you know how it is with kids, she'd said loudly, making sure her voice carried to nearby tables. David and I are just so busy with work and school activities. Not everyone has the luxury of simplifying their career choices. The emphasis on simplifying hit like a slap. Her friends, women I'd known peripherally through school and community events, exchanged meaningful glances that spoke volumes about the conversations they'd been having before I arrived. Well, said Brenda Walsh, the wife of one of Nathan's banking colleagues, I think it's wonderful that Madison is exploring different opportunities. Not everyone needs to climb the corporate ladder to find fulfillment. The condescension dripped from every word. These women, who'd never worked a day of physical labor in their lives, were discussing my choices like I was a charity case who needed their understanding and pity. Exactly, Jessica agreed, her voice taking on the saccharine tone she used when she wanted to seem generous while delivering an insult. I mean, someone has to do these jobs, right? And Madison's always been so grounded, so comfortable with simple pleasures. I stood there with my order pad, watching my sister systematically demolish my reputation in front of women whose opinions carried weight in Burlington's social circles. Every word was carefully chosen to sound supportive while actually broadcasting that I'd fallen from grace, that the girl who'd once been college-educated and ambitious was now reduced to serving their salmon salads and craft cocktails. Can I start you ladies with some drinks? I managed, my professional smile feeling like it was carved from stone. The lunch lasted 2 hours. Jessica ordered complicated modifications to every dish, sent back her soup for being too cold, and asked for extra everything while tipping exactly 15%, enough to avoid looking cheap, but not enough to suggest she valued my service. Her friends followed her lead, treating me with the kind of polite dismissiveness reserved for hired help, but the real damage came at the end of the meal, when Jessica stood up to leave and delivered her final performance piece. Madison, honey, she said, her voice pitched loud enough for half the restaurant to hear, I just want you to know that David and I are here for you if you ever need anything. I know this transition period has been hard since Grandma passed, and we understand that grief affects people differently. Some people throw themselves into work, others retreat from their ambitions. Both are valid responses to loss. The implication was crystal clear to everyone listening. I was waitressing because I was having some kind of breakdown, not because I'd chosen to earn an honest living. Jessica had managed to frame my employment as a symptom of mental instability while positioning herself as the concerned, stable sister who was worried about my well-being. Thanks for your concern, I replied, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. But I'm exactly where I want to be. Jessica's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Of course you are, sweetie. I just want to make sure you know you have options. After they left, I retreated to the restaurant's small break room and sat on a milk crate, my hands shaking with humiliation and anger. Tom found me there 20 minutes later, still staring at the floor. Rough table, he asked, settling onto another crate across from me. My sister and her friends, I said without looking up. Apparently, I'm their new charity project. Tom was quiet for a moment, then said, You know what I learned in 20 years of restaurant work? The people who treat servers like garbage are usually the ones who are most afraid of ending up in our position. They need us to be beneath them so they can feel superior. It's not about feeling superior, I said. It's about control. They want me to fail so they can swoop in and save me on their terms. Then don't give them the satisfaction. Over the following weeks, Jessica's restaurant visits became a regular occurrence. She'd show up with different groups, her book club, her yoga class, her children's playgroup mothers, each time requesting my section, each time turning the meal into a public display of my reduced circumstances. She'd ask loudly about the specials, compliment the quaint atmosphere, and always make sure to mention how proud the family was of my brave choice to simplify my life. The campaign wasn't limited to the greenhouse. Nathan had started his own version of psychological warfare, appearing at community events where he'd run into people we'd grown up with. I'd hear about these encounters through the Burlington Gossip Network, stories that always followed the same pattern. Nathan expressing concern about his sister's struggles, mentioning how the family was trying to support me through this difficult transition, and hinting that there might be underlying issues he couldn't discuss due to family loyalty. I ran into your brother at the farmer's market, my former high school English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, told me one Saturday morning. He seemed really worried about you. He said you've been having a hard time since your grandmother passed. The genius of Nathan's approach was that he never said anything directly damaging. He just planted seeds of concern that grew into full-blown rumors about my mental health, financial stability, and decision-making capacity. By positioning himself as the worried brother who was too discreet to share details, he created an information vacuum that people filled with their own assumptions and speculation. The social isolation was systematic and devastating. Invitations to parties dried up. Former friends became awkwardly distant when I ran into them around town. Even casual conversations at the coffee shop or grocery store took on a different tone, with people speaking to me in the careful, gentle voices reserved for those who were clearly struggling. But the cruelest blow came when I realized they'd managed to turn my own success against me. I'd been working at the greenhouse for 3 months when Tom offered me a promotion to shift supervisor. It meant better pay, more responsibilities, and recognition of the leadership skills I'd developed managing difficult customers and training new servers. I was proud of the accomplishment. It proved that hard work and competence were still valued. Regardless of what my family thought about service industry jobs, the promotion also meant working some day shifts, which put me in the restaurant during the lunch crowd that included many of Burlington's business professionals. I was expediting orders one Tuesday afternoon when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. I heard Madison Brennan got promoted to supervisor at that restaurant, one woman was saying to her lunch companion. Her brother Nathan thinks it's a good sign that she's starting to stabilize. Such a shame about what happened, the other woman replied. Nathan said the family's been really worried about her mental state since the grandmother died. At least she's functioning well enough to hold down a job. I stood frozen behind the service counter, watching these women, respected members of the community who'd known me since childhood, discuss my mental state like I was a case study in grief-induced breakdown. Nathan had managed to reframe even my professional success as evidence of instability, suggesting that my ability to do my job well was somehow noteworthy given my supposed psychological fragility. That evening, I called Nathan directly for the first time since Grandma's funeral. Madison, he answered on the second ring, his voice carefully neutral. How are you doing? I'm doing well, Nathan. Well enough to know that you've been spreading rumors about my mental health around town. There was a pause, then a sigh. I haven't been spreading rumors. I've been expressing concern for my sister's well-being. There's a difference. The difference is that one makes you look like a caring brother, and the other makes you look like what you actually are, a manipulative bastard who's trying to destroy my reputation so you can contest Grandma's will. Madison, I think you're being paranoid, am I? Because it seems like everywhere I go, people are treating me like I'm having some kind of breakdown. Funny how that started right after you began your campaign to prove I'm not competent to inherit Grandma's house. Nathan's voice hardened. If you're feeling paranoid and isolated, maybe that's something you should examine. Grief can do strange things to people's perception of reality. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired its effectiveness. Even in private conversation, Nathan never dropped his mask of concerned brother. He'd managed to turn my own mental clarity into evidence of instability, my awareness of his manipulation into proof of paranoia. You know what's strange, Nathan? The fact that my supposedly concerned family members never actually ask how I'm doing or offer genuine support. They just spread concern about me to other people while avoiding direct contact. It's almost like they want me to fail rather than succeed. That's not true, and you know it. We've all tried to reach out. Showing up at my workplace to humiliate me isn't reaching out. Having real estate agents evaluate my house without permission isn't reaching out. Telling the entire town that I'm mentally unstable isn't reaching out. Madison, I think you need to consider the possibility that you're not seeing things clearly right now. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling with rage and something that might have been despair. They were good at this, better than I'd given them credit for. They'd managed to isolate me from my community, undermine my credibility, and frame their own cruelty as concern for my well-being. Every move I made to establish independence was reinterpreted as evidence of instability. Every success was minimized or pathologized, but as I sat in Grandma's kitchen that night, surrounded by the walls that had sheltered 3 generations of our family, I realized something important. They could control the narrative about me, but they couldn't control the reality of who I was becoming. Every shift at the greenhouse was making me stronger, more confident, more aware of my own capabilities. Every difficult customer I handled with grace, every crisis I solved, every dollar I earned through my own effort was proof that I could survive without their approval or support. They wanted me to break. They needed me to fail so they could rescue me on their terms, with their conditions, in exchange for my inheritance and my dignity, but I wasn't breaking. I was building something they couldn't touch or understand or take away from me, and that, I was beginning to suspect, scared them more than they were willing to admit. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, thick cream paper, with the logo of Morrison & Associates law firm embossed in gold lettering. I'd been rushing to get ready for my lunch shift when I found it slipped under the front door, my name written in elegant script across the front. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead and a business card. Dear Ms. Brennan, the letter began. I represented your grandmother, Patricia Brennan, in various legal matters over the past 15 years. I have some information regarding her estate that I believe you should be aware of. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience to arrange a meeting. This matter is both time-sensitive and confidential. Sincerely, Margaret Morrison, ESQ. I stared at the letter for a full minute, my coffee growing cold in my hand. Grandma's lawyer? I'd assumed Nathan had handled all the legal aspects of her estate, given his tendency to take charge of family business matters. The fact that there was another lawyer, one who specifically wanted to meet with me, sent my mind racing through possibilities both hopeful and terrifying. Margaret Morrison's office occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian mansion on South Willard Street, the kind of building that whispered old money and established power. The receptionist, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, led me through a hallway lined with oil paintings of Lake Champlain's changing seasons. Margaret Morrison herself was nothing like what I'd expected. She was probably in her early 50s, with short auburn hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd spent decades dealing with family disputes and inherited drama. Her office was warm and welcoming, filled with plants and family photos that made it feel more like a living room than a legal consultation space. Madison, she said, rising from behind a desk covered with neat stacks of files, thank you for coming so quickly. Please, sit down. Can I offer you some tea? I settled into a leather chair across from her desk, my hands fidgeting with the strap of my purse. Your letter said this was about my grandmother's estate. I thought everything had been settled. Margaret's expression grew serious as she opened a thick file folder. Your grandmother came to see me 3 months before she passed away. She was concerned about the family dynamics surrounding her illness and wanted to ensure that certain information would be preserved and shared at the appropriate time. She pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma's familiar handwriting. She asked me to give this to you personally, but only if certain conditions were met. Specifically, only if it became clear that other family members were attempting to contest her will or undermine her decisions. My heart started pounding. How would you know if that was happening? Because Patricia was thorough in her planning. Margaret replied with a slight smile. She arranged for me to monitor the situation discreetly. When your brother Nathan contacted 3 different law firms about contesting the will, and when court documents were filed questioning your grandmother's mental competency, I knew it was time to reach out. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Nathan filed court documents? Last week. He's alleging that Patricia was not of sound mind when she transferred the house to you, and that you exercised undue influence over her decision-making. He's requesting that the transfer be voided and the property be included in the general estate distribution. I felt the blood drain from my face. Despite all the rumors and hints and threats, part of me had believed that Nathan wouldn't actually follow through with legal action. The reality of it, the formal challenge to Grandma's final wishes, hit me like a physical blow. Margaret leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Madison, your grandmother anticipated this exact scenario. She wanted you to have all the information. You'd need to defend her decision and your inheritance. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were several documents, a handwritten letter from Grandma, medical records from her doctor, and what appeared to be a transcript of a recorded conversation. The letter was vintage Patricia Brennan, direct, loving, and completely without illusion about her family's character. My dearest Madison, it began, if you're reading this, it means that Nathan and Jessica have shown their true colors, just as I suspected they would. I want you to know that every decision I made regarding the house was carefully considered and legally documented. I was of completely sound mind, as the enclosed medical evaluations will prove. I looked up at Margaret. She had psychological evaluations done? 3 of them, actually, all within 2 weeks of transferring the house to you. Patricia wanted to create an unshakable legal foundation for her decision. The doctors all confirmed that she was mentally sharp, understood the implications of her choices, and was acting free of any coercion or undue influence. I continued reading Grandma's letter, my emotions cycling between gratitude and heartbreak. I've watched my children and grandchildren for 8 decades, Madison. I know who they really are when the polish comes off and they think no one is looking. Nathan has always been ambitious to the point of ruthlessness, convinced that his intelligence entitles him to whatever he wants. Jessica has spent her entire adult life looking for shortcuts and handouts while resenting anyone who actually works for what they have. But you, my dear girl, have something they lack: integrity. You gave up your job and your independence to care for me, not because you were calculating an inheritance, but because you loved me enough to sacrifice your own comfort for mine. That kind of character can't be faked or bought, and it's exactly what I want protecting this house after I'm gone. I'm giving you the tools to fight them, Madison, but more importantly, I'm giving you permission to stop caring about their approval. You don't owe them explanations, apologies, or compromises. You owe them nothing but the truth about who they've chosen to become. The letter was signed with her full name and dated just 2 weeks before her death, with a notary seal at the bottom. Margaret handed me the transcript next. This is perhaps the most important piece of evidence. Your grandmother recorded a conversation she had with Nathan and Jessica about 6 weeks before she died. I scanned the pages, reading what amounted to a devastating indictment of my siblings' character in their own words. The conversation had taken place during one of their rare visits, when they thought Grandma was napping in her bedroom. But she'd been awake, listening to them discuss their plans for her estate with the same detached calculation they might use to divide up a business deal. The house alone is worth at least $300,000, Nathan's voice was transcribed as saying. If we can get Madison declared incompetent to inherit, or prove that Mom wasn't thinking clearly when she made the transfer, we can force a sale and split the proceeds. Jessica's response was even worse. Honestly, it would probably be better. For Madison anyway. She's clearly having some kind of breakdown since Mom got sick. Living alone in that big house is just going to make her more isolated and weird. We'd be doing her a favor. The transcript continued for several pages, documenting their casual discussion of my supposed mental instability, their plans to contest the will, and their complete lack of concern for Grandma's actual wishes. They talked about her like she was already dead, and about me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be considered. Jesus, I whispered, setting the transcript aside. She heard all of this? Margaret nodded grimly. Patricia was heartbroken but not surprised. She said it confirmed what she'd suspected about their motivations. That's when she decided to create this insurance policy. The final document in the envelope was perhaps the most shocking of all, a detailed financial statement showing that Grandma's estate was worth significantly more than any of us had realized. In addition to the house, she'd accumulated nearly $400,000 in stocks, bonds, and savings accounts that she'd never mentioned to anyone. She lived so modestly, I said, staring at the numbers. I had no idea she had this much money. Patricia was from the generation that lived through the Depression, Margaret explained. She learned to save every penny and invest wisely, but she also learned not to display wealth openly. She was worth almost $750,000 in total assets. My head was spinning. What does this mean for Nathan's legal challenge? Margaret's smile was predatory in its satisfaction. It means he's about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating his grandmother. Patricia left specific instructions about how to handle any challenges to her will. She's authorized me to use whatever resources necessary to defend her decisions, including hiring private investigators to document Nathan and Jessica's behavior, and bringing character witnesses who can testify to your caring relationship with her. She leaned back in her chair, clearly relishing what came next. But more importantly, Patricia included a clause in her will that Nathan doesn't know about yet. If anyone contests her decisions regarding the house transfer, they forfeit their inheritance from the remaining estate entirely. Nathan and Jessica would each have inherited about $75,000 from her savings and investments. By filing that lawsuit, Nathan just cost both of them their entire inheritance. The justice of it was so perfect, so completely in character for Grandma, that I almost laughed despite the emotional weight of the situation. She'd known exactly what Nathan would do, and she'd laid a trap that would expose his greed while protecting both her wishes and my inheritance. There's one more thing, Margaret said, pulling out a final document. Patricia wanted to ensure that you'd have the resources to not just survive this challenge, but to thrive despite it. She's established a trust fund in your name that will provide you with a monthly income for the next 5 years, specifically to give you the financial freedom to pursue whatever path you choose without worrying about basic survival. I stared at the trust documentation, my eyes blurring with tears. The monthly payments were more than I made waiting tables, enough to cover all my living expenses and then some. Grandma had thought of everything. She'd given me not just a house and an inheritance, but the gift of time and choice. Why didn't she tell me about any of this while she was alive? I asked. Margaret's expression softened. Because she wanted you to discover your own strength first. She said that if you knew about the financial safety net, you might not push yourself to become independent. She wanted you to prove to yourself that you could survive and succeed on your own terms before she revealed that you'd never actually been at risk of failure. The magnitude of Grandma's love and planning hit me like a wave. She'd orchestrated not just my financial security, but my personal growth. She'd forced me to discover my own resilience by letting me believe I was truly alone, all while secretly ensuring that I'd never actually be abandoned or left without resources. So what happens now? I asked. Now we let Nathan proceed with his lawsuit, knowing that he's walking into a trap of his own making. When the case goes to court, we'll present all of this evidence, the medical evaluations proving Patricia's mental competency, the recorded conversation showing their mercenary motivations, and the testimony of everyone who witnessed your genuine care for your grandmother. Margaret's smile was sharp as a blade. Nathan wanted a fight about your fitness to inherit. Instead, he's going to get a public examination of his own character. And when it's over, he and Jessica will have lost not just their lawsuit, but their entire inheritance and their reputations in this community. I left Margaret's office feeling like I'd been reborn. For months, I'd been fighting a battle I thought I was losing, defending myself against attacks I couldn't fully understand or counter. But Grandma had been planning this victory all along, anticipating every move her children would make and preparing responses that would expose their true nature while protecting my future. As I walked back to my car, I thought about Nathan and Jessica, probably celebrating their legal filing and already planning how to spend their portion of what they assumed would be a forced house sale. They had no idea that their grandmother had been 3 steps ahead of them from the beginning, turning their own greed into the weapon that would destroy their credibility and their inheritance. For the first time since Grandma's death, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: hope. Not just for survival, but for actual victory. Not just for keeping what was mine, but for showing the entire community exactly who my family really was beneath their masks of concern and respectability. The battle was far from over, but I was no longer fighting it alone. I had Grandma's wisdom, Grandma's resources, and most importantly, Grandma's unwavering belief in my ability to not just endure their attacks, but to emerge stronger than they could ever imagine. They wanted to destroy me to get what they thought was rightfully theirs. But they were about to learn that sometimes, when you try to tear someone down, you end up revealing exactly who you are in the process, and the truth, as Grandma had always taught me, has a way of setting everyone free, whether they want to be free or not. The court hearing was scheduled for a cold November morning. But the real explosion happened 3 days earlier at the greenhouse during the dinner rush. I was expediting orders when Jessica walked in with what looked like half of Burlington's social elite, the mayor's wife, the president of the Historical Society, 2 prominent real estate developers, and several women from the country club board. They'd clearly coordinated their arrival, sweeping into the restaurant like they owned it and requesting the large corner table that offered the best view of the entire dining room. Tom caught my eye from behind the bar, his expression questioning. We'd developed a system over the past few months. Whenever my family showed up for their public humiliation performances, he'd assign another server to their table. But tonight felt different. There was an energy in the air, a sense of anticipation. That made my skin crawl. I'll take them, I told Tom, straightening my apron. It's time to end this. The conversation at their table stopped abruptly when I approached, 8 pairs of eyes tracking my movement like predators watching prey. Jessica's smile was particularly venomous, the kind of expression that promised entertainment at someone else's expense. Madison, she exclaimed, her voice carrying across the restaurant. Perfect timing. We were just discussing the most fascinating legal developments. I pulled out my order pad, my hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Good evening, ladies. Can I start you with some drinks? Actually, said Constance Hartwell, the mayor's wife, we were hoping you could clear up some confusion about your family situation. Jessica was telling us about the court case regarding your grandmother's house. The question was inappropriate and invasive, designed to put me on the spot in front of people whose opinions carried weight in Burlington's social hierarchy. I could feel the attention of nearby tables turning toward us, sensing drama in the making. I'm not sure what confusion there might be, I replied evenly. My grandmother left me her house. That's pretty straightforward. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malicious pleasure. Well, that's not exactly the whole story, is it? I mean, there are questions about Grandma's mental state when she made that decision. Nathan's just trying to protect the family's interests. And your interests too, added Linda Morrison from the Historical Society. I can't imagine it's easy maintaining such a large property on a waitress's salary. Surely selling and splitting the proceeds would be more practical for everyone. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in my chest, the same feeling I'd experienced during months of their coordinated attacks on my character and choices. But this time, something was different. This time, I had weapons they didn't know about. You're absolutely right, I said, setting down my order pad. It would be more practical. Just like it would be more practical for Nathan to actually read legal documents before filing lawsuits. The table went quiet. Jessica's smile faltered slightly. You see, I continued, my voice gaining confidence with each word, what Nathan didn't realize when he filed his challenge is that my grandmother included a very specific clause in her will. Anyone who contests her decisions about the house automatically forfeits their entire inheritance from her estate. Jessica's face went white. That's not possible. It's not only possible, it's already happened. Nathan cost both of you about $75,000 each when he filed those papers last week. The silence at the table was deafening. I could see the mental calculations happening behind their eyes, the money they'd already spent planning to receive, the debts they'd assumed would be covered by their inheritance, the lifestyle adjustments they'd now have to make. But that's not even the best part, I said, warming to my theme. The really interesting thing is the recorded conversation my grandmother made of you two discussing your plans to have me declared incompetent so you could steal my inheritance. Jessica shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. You're lying. Am I? Because I have the transcript right here in my apron pocket. Would you like me to read some of your favorite quotes? Like when you said it would be better for me to lose the house because I'm clearly having a breakdown. Or when Nathan calculated exactly how much money he'd make if he could get Grandma declared mentally incompetent. The other women at the table were staring at Jessica with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. These were people who prided themselves on propriety and family values, and they were witnessing the ugly reality behind Jessica's carefully constructed image of the concerned sister. She was sick, Jessica said desperately, her voice rising. She wasn't thinking clearly. Madison manipulated her. Actually, I interrupted, Grandma had 3 separate psychological evaluations in the weeks before she transferred the house to me. All 3 doctors confirmed that she was completely mentally competent and understood exactly what she was doing. The mayor's wife was looking at Jessica like she'd never seen her before. You recorded your grandmother without her knowledge? No, I said with a smile that probably wasn't very nice. She recorded you without your knowledge. Grandma always was smarter than you gave her credit for. Jessica's composure finally cracked completely. This is ridiculous. You can't just, you have no right to. I have every right, I said quietly. I have the right that comes from actually caring about someone instead of seeing them as a bank account with legs. I have the right that comes from giving up my job and my independence to take care of the woman who raised us. And I have the right that comes from being honest about my motivations instead of pretending concern while plotting behind someone's back. The entire restaurant had gone quiet now, servers and customers alike drawn to the drama unfolding at the corner table. I could see Tom watching from behind the bar, ready to intervene if things got physical, but his expression suggested he was actually enjoying the show. You know what the really sad part is? I continued, my voice carrying to every corner of the now silent dining room. Grandma loved you both so much. Right up until the end, she hoped you'd prove her wrong about your character. She wanted to Believe that her children and grandchildren were better people than you've turned out to be. Jessica's eyes were filling with tears, but they looked more like tears of rage than sadness. Stop it. She gave you every opportunity to show genuine concern for her well-being or mine. Instead, you showed up with real estate agents and lawyers. And schemes to declare her incompetent so you could steal what she wanted to give me freely. I said stop it. She knew exactly who you were, Jessica. That's why she recorded your conversation. That's why she had the psychological evaluations. That's why she included the forfeiture clause in her will. She knew that if she left you the chance, you'd try to destroy me to get what you wanted. Jessica grabbed her purse, her face blotchy with humiliation and fury. This isn't over, Madison. Nathan will appeal. We'll fight this until what? Until you've spent more on legal fees than you would have inherited anyway? Until every person in Burlington knows exactly what kind of people you really are? Until you've destroyed any remaining relationships you have with family members who might have actually cared about you. I stepped closer to her, my voice dropping to just above a whisper. It's already over, Jessica. You lost the moment you decided that money was more important than love, that inheritance was more valuable than integrity. Grandma saw that choice for what it was, and she responded accordingly. Jessica fled then, practically running for the exit with her entourage trailing behind her like embarrassed ducklings. The restaurant erupted in whispers and murmurs as normal. Conversation slowly resumed. Tom appeared at my elbow with a glass of water and a grin that could have powered the entire downtown district. Well, he said, that was better than cable TV. I took the water with shaking hands, only now realizing how much adrenaline was coursing through my system. I probably shouldn't have done that. Are you kidding? You should have charged admission. Half the town's been wondering what was really going on with your family situation. Now they know. As I walked home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine freedom. Not just from their manipulation and attacks, but from the fear that had been controlling my choices since Grandma died. I'd finally stopped caring about their approval, stopped trying to prove my worth to people who were determined not to see it. The house on Maple Street was dark when I arrived, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like mine. Tomorrow, I'd call Margaret Morrison and tell her about Jessica's public meltdown. The day after that, I'd probably have to deal with Nathan's response to learning that his lawsuit had backfired spectacularly, but tonight, for the first time since Grandma's death, I felt like I could breathe freely in my own home. The people who'd tried to make me ashamed of my choices, my work, my life, they were the ones who should be ashamed, and based on Jessica's expression as she fled the greenhouse, I had a feeling they were finally starting to realize it. The morning after Jessica's public meltdown at the greenhouse, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Nathan had apparently spent the night cycling through rage, denial, and desperate attempts at damage control. His messages ranged from furious accusations about my theatrical display to pathetic attempts at reconciliation that started with phrases like, "I think we've all let emotions get the better of us." I deleted every single message without reading them completely. The time for explanations and reconciliation had passed months ago, somewhere between Nathan's first real estate agent visit and Jessica's campaign to convince the town I was mentally unstable. Margaret Morrison called at 8 a.m. sharp, her voice crackling with barely contained excitement. "Madison, I heard about last night. Half of Burlington is talking about it. Is that good or bad for our case?" I asked, cradling the phone against my shoulder while I made coffee in Grandma's kitchen. "It's perfect. Nothing builds a stronger legal case than witnesses who've seen the opposition's true character firsthand. Constance Hartwell called me this morning. Apparently she's known your family for 20 years and never realized what Nathan and Jessica were really like until last night." Over the following weeks, the court case became almost anticlimactic. Nathan's lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 60s who clearly wished he'd never taken the case, tried valiantly to argue that Patricia Brennan had been unduly influenced by her granddaughter. But when Margaret presented the medical evaluations, the recorded conversation, and testimony from 8 respected community members who'd witnessed Jessica's restaurant outburst, the judge's decision was swift and decisive. "The evidence overwhelmingly supports that Mrs. Brennan was of sound mind and acting of her own free will," Judge Harrison announced from the bench. Furthermore, the recorded conversation between the plaintiffs suggests motivations that are inconsistent with genuine concern for either their grandmother's welfare or the defendant's best interests. The original property transfer stands as executed. Nathan and Jessica didn't even look at me as they left the courtroom. Their lawyer had already explained the inheritance forfeiture clause, meaning they'd lost not just their lawsuit, but their entire inheritance from Grandma's estate. Nathan had quite literally sued himself out of $75,000, but the real transformation began after the legal victory, when I finally had the mental space to think about what I actually wanted to do with my life. The trust fund payments had started arriving monthly, providing me with financial security I'd never experienced before. For the first time since college, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck or calculating whether I could afford both groceries and gas in the same week. The freedom was intoxicating, but it also forced me to confront a question I'd been avoiding: what did I want to build with this opportunity? The answer came to me during a particularly busy Friday night shift at the greenhouse. I was watching Tom coordinate the kitchen and front of house like a conductor managing an orchestra, turning controlled chaos into seamless service, when I realized how much I'd learned about restaurant operations over the past year. I understood food costs, staff scheduling, customer service, inventory management, all the practical skills that my hospitality degree had covered in theory but that I'd never really grasped until I'd lived them. More importantly, I'd discovered that I genuinely loved the restaurant business. I loved the energy of a busy service, the satisfaction of solving problems in real time, the way a well-run restaurant became a community hub where relationships were built over shared meals. The work that Nathan and Jessica had mocked as beneath my education had actually become my passion. That realization led to a conversation with Tom that changed everything. "I've been thinking about expansion," he told me one evening after we'd closed, sitting at the bar with a beer while I counted tips. "There's a space available on Main Street, bigger than this place, with a full liquor license. But the startup costs are pretty significant." I looked up from my counting. "What kind of startup costs?" "About $200,000 for the lease, renovations, equipment, and operating capital for the first 6 months. It's a solid business plan, but I don't have that kind of money available." The number hung in the air between us. Tom had no idea about my trust fund or inheritance. As far as he knew, I was still the financially struggling waitress who'd started working there to pay rent. But I could see the opportunity clearly, a chance to be part of something bigger, to use Grandma's gift not just for security but for growth. "What if you had a business partner?" I asked carefully. "Someone who could provide the capital in exchange for an ownership stake?" Tom's eyebrows rose. "Do you know someone who might be interested?" "Maybe." "What kind of partnership were you thinking?" Over the next month, we hammered out the details. I would provide the startup capital in exchange for a 40% ownership stake in the new restaurant. Tom would maintain operational control and receive a 51% share, with the remaining 9% reserved for key employees as profit-sharing incentives. We'd call it Sage and Thyme, a nod to the greenhouse's herb-focused concept but with a more upscale menu and atmosphere. The due diligence process taught me more about business operations than my entire college education had. I spent weeks analyzing profit margins, studying lease agreements, and learning about commercial kitchen equipment from vendors who were impressed by my detailed questions and obvious preparation. Margaret Morrison connected me with a business attorney who helped structure the partnership to protect both Tom's operational autonomy and my financial investment, but the real education came from the renovation process. I spent my days off working alongside contractors, learning about electrical systems and kitchen ventilation while getting my hands dirty in ways that would have horrified my family 6 months earlier. There was something deeply satisfying about building something tangible, creating value through actual work rather than financial manipulation. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. Working with contractors and suppliers, negotiating deals and solving problems, I discovered confidence I'd never known I possessed. These were people who judged competence based on results rather than pedigree, who respected good ideas regardless of their source. In their world, a college degree mattered less than the ability to make smart decisions under pressure. Nathan tried to interfere once, showing up at the construction site with questions about where I'd gotten the money for such a significant investment. He'd clearly done research into commercial real estate costs and couldn't reconcile the numbers with his assumptions about my financial situation. "I hope you're not using the house as collateral for some risky business venture," he said, watching workers install new kitchen equipment with obvious calculations running in his head. "The house is fine, Nathan. My business arrangements don't concern you. Everything you do concerns the family, Madison. If you're getting in over your head financially, then I'll handle it myself, just like I've been handling everything else for the past year." He left without getting the information he'd come for, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. Nathan couldn't accept that his little sister might be succeeding beyond his expectations, building something valuable while he was still calculating how to profit from other people's losses. The grand opening of Sage and Thyme was scheduled for a Saturday evening in late spring. We'd spent weeks training new staff, testing menu items, and perfecting service procedures. Tom had hired several servers from the greenhouse along with new culinary talent he'd been tracking for months. The reservation book was completely full for our first week, with a waiting list that stretched into the following month. Standing in the newly renovated dining room the night before we opened, looking at tables set with fresh linens and the herb garden Tom had planted along the front windows. I felt something I'd never experienced before, pride in something I'd built rather than inherited. This wasn't Grandma's house or Grandma's trust fund or even Grandma's revenge against Nathan and Jessica. This was mine. Every decision, every dollar invested, every hour of work had been my choice, my risk, my commitment to building something better than what existed before. The girl who'd been humiliated in this same building months earlier, dismissed as a failure, mocked for her career choices, treated like a servant by her own family, was now co-owner of what promised to be Burlington's premier dining establishment. But the real test would come tomorrow night, when Sage and Time opened its doors to the public for the first time. And when some very specific members of that public discovered exactly how much their former, struggling waitress sister had accomplished while they were busy counting money they'd never receive. The spring evening was perfect for outdoor dining. And Sage and Time's patio was buzzing with the kind of energy that made all the hard work worthwhile. We'd been open for 2 months, and word had spread faster than we'd ever imagined. Food bloggers from Boston were making the drive to Vermont specifically to try our farm-to-table menu, and we'd already been approached by 3 different investors interested in helping us expand. I was reviewing next week's special event bookings when our newest server, Marcus, appeared at my office door looking flustered. "Madison, there's a situation at table 12. A woman is claiming she owns part of this restaurant and demanding to speak with management. She's getting pretty loud about it." My pen froze mid-signature. Only one person would have the audacity to make such a claim, and I'd been wondering when Jessica would finally work up the courage to show her face here. "Is she alone?" I asked, already standing and smoothing my navy blazer. "No, there's a man with her. Middle-aged, wearing an expensive suit, keeps checking his watch like he's got somewhere important to be." Nathan. Of course they'd come together. Probably coordinating their strategy like they were planning a hostile corporate takeover instead of crashing their estranged sister's restaurant. The dining room was nearly full when I emerged from the back office, and I could spot them immediately. Jessica sat ramrod straight at a prime patio table, her designer handbag positioned prominently on the white tablecloth like a territorial marker. Nathan was gesticulating with his phone, probably showing someone photos of the restaurant while explaining how his unstable sister had somehow stumbled into success. They dressed for the occasion, Jessica in the kind of outfit she wore to country club events, Nathan in his best banker's uniform. They wanted to look like they belonged in this upscale environment, like successful people who could afford to dine at Burlington's newest hotspot. What they hadn't expected was how much I'd changed. "Good evening," I said, approaching their table with the confident stride I'd developed over months of managing difficult situations. "I understand you've been asking for management?" Nathan looked up from his phone, and I watched his expression cycle through surprise, confusion, and dawning realization. The woman standing before him wasn't the defeated waitress he'd been expecting to find. I was polished, professional, clearly in charge of my environment. "Madison." Jessica's voice came out higher than usual. "We were hoping to have dinner and maybe talk about what?" I interrupted smoothly. "About how you spent months telling everyone in town that I was having a mental breakdown. About the lawsuit you filed to steal my inheritance? Or about the restaurant you're sitting in that you just told my staff you partially own?" The couple at the neighboring table had stopped their conversation to listen. Jessica's face flushed red as she realized they had an audience. "We never said we owned part of this place," Nathan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really? Because my server distinctly heard your companion claim ownership. That's a serious allegation to make about someone else's business." I kept my tone professional but let just enough steel creep in to make my point. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. He'd clearly researched the restaurant before coming, probably trying to figure out how I'd managed to succeed so dramatically. The monthly trust fund payments from Grandma's estate would have given me the capital, but he'd have no way of knowing about those since he'd forfeited any right to information about her financial arrangements. "Look," he said, attempting his old authoritative tone, "we know you've done well for yourself here. We're proud of you. We just thought maybe it was time to put family differences aside and what? Benefit from my success after trying to destroy it." I shook my head. "Nathan, you sued me. You filed legal documents claiming I manipulated a dying woman. You told half of Burlington that I was mentally unstable. Exactly which part of that suggests you want to put differences aside?" Jessica leaned forward desperately. "That was all a misunderstanding. We were just concerned about you. You were concerned about my inheritance. There's a difference." Tom appeared at my shoulder then, and I could see several of our regular customers watching the drama unfold with fascination. This wasn't the kind of scene I wanted in my restaurant, but I also wasn't going to let them intimidate me in my own establishment. "Is there a problem here?" Tom asked, his manager's instincts kicking in. These folks were just leaving, I said. Calmly. They seem to have confused us with a restaurant that takes walk-ins. Nathan's face darkened. We're not leaving until we get a table. We have as much right to eat here as anyone else. Actually, you don't. I smiled, the kind of smile I'd learned from watching Grandma handle difficult people. This is a private establishment, and management reserves the right to refuse service to anyone. I'm exercising that right. You can't do that, Jessica sputtered. We're family. No, I replied quietly, we're not. The family doesn't try to steal from each other. The family doesn't spread malicious rumors about mental health. The family doesn't file lawsuits to overturn a grandmother's dying wishes. The words hit like physical blows. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but they looked more like tears of rage than sadness. Nathan's jaw clenched as he realized that his little sister was no longer someone he could intimidate or manipulate. Fine, he said, standing abruptly and throwing his napkin on the table. But don't think this changes anything. Success in the restaurant business is temporary. When this place fails, and it will, don't expect any help from us. I looked around the bustling patio, at the satisfied customers enjoying their meals, at the staff who took pride in their work, and at the reservation book that was full for the next month. Nathan, I said softly, if this place fails, it won't be because I didn't work hard enough or because I wasn't smart enough or because I didn't deserve success. And if it succeeds, which it already has, it won't be because I had your approval or support. As they gathered their things to leave, Jessica made one last desperate attempt. Madison, please. We made mistakes, but we're still family. Grandma would have wanted us to stay together. The mention of Grandma sparked something fierce in my chest. Grandma knew exactly who you were. That's why she recorded your conversation about having her declared incompetent. That's why she included the forfeiture clause in her will. She gave you every chance to show genuine love and concern, and you chose greed instead. They left without another word, walking past tables full of people who'd witnessed their humiliation. I stood watching until they disappeared around the corner, then took a deep breath and returned to the work of running my restaurant. 6 months later, Sage and Thyme was featured in Food and Wine magazine as one of America's most promising new restaurants. The article mentioned my journey from hospitality school to server to owner, focusing on the authenticity and community connection that made the restaurant special. I never saw Nathan or Jessica again. Through Burlington's reliable gossip network, I learned they'd both left town, Nathan for a job opportunity that was probably more about escaping damaged reputation than advancing his career, Jessica following her husband to a new state where nobody knew about the family drama. The house on Maple Street was now mine completely, both legally and emotionally. I'd renovated Grandma's garden, adding herbs that we used in the restaurant and flowers that bloomed in succession from spring through fall. Sometimes I'd sit on the front porch in the evening, watching the neighborhood kids play under the same oak tree I'd climbed as a child, and feel the deep satisfaction that comes from honoring someone's memory through your own success. Grandma had been right about everything, about choosing integrity over convenience, about building something rather than inheriting it, about the difference between people who love you and people who love what you can give them, but most importantly, she'd been right about the power of walking away from toxic relationships, even when they're wrapped in the language of family obligation. I was Madison Brennan, restaurant owner, community member, and granddaughter of a woman who taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's worst instincts, and every successful service, every satisfied customer, every dollar earned through honest work was proof that her faith in me had been justified. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.